The cabin door sealed with a hydraulic hiss that felt too final. Marcus Chen didn't look up from his phone. The Billionaire CEO sprawled across 3 first-class seats. Italian leather shoes kicked onto the armrest, typing with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. Around him, the chartered Boeing's interior gleamed, cream leather, gold fixtures, soft lighting that cost more than most people's cars. Shanice Williams moved down the aisle with practiced grace, her uniform crisp, despite the pre-flight chaos. She'd worked this route before. Wealthy passengers, entitled attitudes. Nothing new, but something felt off. "Sir, I need you to fasten your seatbelt." Her voice was polite, professional. "Federal regulations require—" "I know what they require." Marcus didn't look up. His fingers kept moving across the screen. "I also know I paid for this entire plane, so I'll sit how I want." Laughter rippled through the cabin. Other passengers, tech executives, investors, influencers, watched the exchange with amused eyes. The help being put in her place. "Entertainment before takeoff." Shanice's jaw tightened. She'd faced worse than this. "Sir, it's not about payment. It's about safety." "Safety?" Now he looked at her. His eyes traveled from her face to her name tag, dismissive. "You're a flight attendant. I build systems that move billions of dollars. I think I can assess my own risk." The co-pilot's voice crackled overhead. "Flight crew, prepare for departure." Shanice held his gaze for 3 seconds. Professional training versus instinct. She saw something in his expression. Not just arrogance, but the dangerous kind. The kind that believed rules were for other people. She stepped back. "As you wish, Mr. Chen." The engines roared to life. Through the window, the tarmac began to slide away. Marcus returned to his phone, already forgetting her. But Shanice didn't forget. She moved toward the galley, her hand brushing the emergency equipment panel as she passed. The metal felt wrong. Too loose, her blood went cold. Shanice had learned to make herself invisible. It was a survival skill she'd perfected over the past 2 years, moving through spaces where people like her were meant to serve, not speak. The irony wasn't lost on her. 5 years ago, she'd commanded rescue operations in mountain ranges and war zones. Now she commanded nothing but beverage carts and forced smiles. Her apartment in Queens was small but clean. Photos lined one wall. Her grandmother Lorraine in her church hat, beaming. Shanice in Air Force dress blues, younger, stronger, full of purpose. A folded flag in a shadow box, her father's, from a war that took him before she turned 10. She worked 3 jobs now. Flight attendant, weekend catering, night shifts at a medical supply warehouse. All of it funneled toward one thing, keeping Grandma Lorraine in the assisted living facility that actually treated her like a person. Dialysis 3 times a week, medications that cost more than rent. Shanice didn't complain. Lorraine had raised her after Dad died, had believed in her when the neighborhood wrote her off, had driven 6 hours to watch her graduate pararescue training, one of only 7 women in her class. "Baby girl," Lorraine had said that day, gripping her hand, "you got your daddy's heart. Use it to save people. That's what we're here for." Shanice carried that voice everywhere. Marcus Chen's world existed in a different dimension. The tech empire he'd built, China Tech Solutions, had made him a billionaire by 32. Born in a Fresno apartment to immigrants who worked 3 jobs between them, he'd clawed his way up through code, ruthlessness, and a singular philosophy. Rules were suggestions for people without vision. His disruption model was famous. Ignore regulations, move fast, apologize later if necessary. But usually it wasn't. By the time regulators caught up, he'd already won. He sat in meetings with senators, appeared on magazine covers, gave TED Talks about breaking the system. His employees worshipped him. His competitors feared him. His investors got rich, but lately something gnawed at him, a restlessness he couldn't code away. Success felt hollow. Every achievement just revealed the next mountain. He'd bought this plane, this entire flight on impulse, gathering his executive team for a strategy retreat in Aspen. Really, he just wanted to feel in control of something again. He glanced at the flight attendant moving through the galley. Shanice, her name tag had said. Pretty woman, quiet confidence in her movements, but like everyone else in service positions, ultimately forgettable. His phone buzzed. Another deal closing. Another million added to accounts that already had too many zeros. He felt nothing. The other passengers settled into their seats. Venture capitalists comparing portfolios. Social media influencers taking selfies with champagne flutes. Marcus's assistant, Trevor, a nervous 26-year-old who lived in perpetual fear of disappointing his boss, fumbled with his laptop bag. Outside the window, clouds gathered on the horizon, dark, heavy. Shanice checked the weather report on her tablet. Turbulence expected. Nothing unusual for this route but that panel. That loose metal panel. She told herself she was being paranoid. PTSD from her military days, when every sound meant potential disaster. The equipment had been inspected, certified. Regulations existed for a reason. Still, her fingers traced the outline of the small trauma kit she kept in her personal bag. Old habits, things she couldn't leave behind even when she'd left the uniform. The plane began taxiing toward the runway. Marcus laughed at something on his screen. Trevor spilled coffee on his shirt and apologized to no one in particular. Shanice stood in the galley, watching everything, seeing what others missed, the way the emergency panel door didn't quite sit flush, the faint smell of hydraulic fluid that shouldn't be there, the micro-hesitation in the engine's rhythm during taxi. Small things, probably nothing, but in her experience disasters always started small. The ascent was smooth until it wasn't. At 8,000 feet, Trevor stood to retrieve something from the overhead compartment. The seatbelt sign blazed amber. He ignored it, just like his boss had taught him. "Trevor, sit down." Shanice's voice cut through the cabin hum. He waved her off. "Just grabbing my other plane hit a pocket of turbulence." Not severe, but enough. Trevor stumbled sideways, his laptop bag swinging wild. It crashed into the emergency equipment panel with a metallic crunch. Silence dropped like a curtain. "Sorry." Trevor's face flushed red. He grabbed the bag and scrambled back to his seat. "Sorry, I'm so sorry." Shanice was already moving. She reached the panel in 4 strides, her trained eyes scanning the damage. The impact had torn the already loose cover completely free. Behind it, the oxygen system's backup valve hung at an angle. Wrong, dangerous, compromised. Her stomach dropped. "Sir." She turned to Marcus, keeping her voice level. "We have a problem." He didn't look up. Trevor already apologized. Not about the apology. "About the equipment." She pointed to the damaged panel. "The backup oxygen system is compromised. We need to abort takeoff and return. We're already airborne." Marcus finally glanced at her, annoyed. "And we have a schedule." "Mr. Chen, I'm trying to explain. You're trying to make a minor incident into a drama." He set his phone down slowly, his voice dropping to that special tone wealthy men used when explaining reality to people they considered beneath them. "That panel is backup. We have primary systems. We have redundancies. Do you know what this flight costs per hour?" Shanice felt 200 eyes on her. The other passengers watched with that peculiar mix of curiosity and schadenfreude. The black flight attendant being difficult, making everyone uncomfortable. "Sir, I have experience with aircraft emergency systems. You have experience serving drinks." Marcus's smile was sharp. "I have experience building technologies that run half the internet. I think I can assess whether a scratched panel is worth turning around." Laughter erupted. Not loud, but enough. Knowing chuckles. A few passengers exchanged glances that said, "Dramatic." Trevor sank into his seat, mortified. The other flight attendant, Beth, a 50-year-old veteran who'd learned long ago to pick her battles, touched Shanice's arm gently. "A warning. Let it go." With respect, Shanice tried again, her voice quieter now. "I was a pararescue specialist in the Air Force. I know what a compromised oxygen system—" Were you? Marcus cut her off. Past tense. Now you're here. Serving me. So served, the words landed like a slap. Shanice's hands clenched. She thought of Lorraine. The medical bills. The 3 jobs that barely covered them. The apartment lease that came due in 2 weeks. She thought of the passengers. 200 souls, including a family with 2 children in row 12. She thought of her training, her oath. The lives she'd saved when everyone said a woman couldn't do what she did. I'm documenting this. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. You've been informed of a safety hazard. Your refusal to act is on record. Marcus's expression went cold. And your insubordination is on record. We'll discuss your employment status when we land. He turned away. Conversation over. The cabin returned to its pre-flight buzz. Drinks ordered, devices pulled out. Conversations resumed. Shanice walked back to the galley. Each step measured, professional. But her heart hammered against her ribs like it used to before mission drops. Beth squeezed her shoulder. Girl, you gotta let these things go. Shanice didn't respond. She pulled out her phone and took 3 photos of the damaged panel. Documented the hydraulic fluid she now saw leaking. Just a few drops, but enough. The plane climbed through 12,000 feet. The pilot's voice announced they'd reached cruising altitude shortly. Everything seemed fine, but Shanice knew better. She'd seen this pattern before. The small failure that cascaded. The ignored warning that became tragedy. She prepared quietly. Checked the medical kit. Reviewed emergency protocols in her mind. Located the portable oxygen bottles. When disaster came, and she knew it would, she'd be ready, even if no one believed her. The galley felt like a prison. Shanice stood behind the curtain, hands braced against the narrow counter. Her reflection stared back from the stainless steel coffee maker, distorted, stretched, unrecognizable. She looked like someone drowning. You're not a hero anymore. Marcus's words circled her mind like vultures. Past tense, were you? As if her training evaporated the moment she traded combat boots for service flats. As if knowledge had an expiration date tied to employment status. Her hands trembled. She pressed them flat against the counter. In the Air Force, people listened. When she said compromise system, teams moved. When she identified danger, commanders acted. Her voice carried weight measured in lives saved. 37 documented rescues, countless more assists. Here, her voice carried nothing but annoyance. The cabin hummed beyond the curtain. Laughter. Champagne glasses clinking. Marcus holding court with some story about disrupting another industry. The passengers loved him. Successful, bold, unbound by the timidity that held ordinary people back. She was ordinary now. That's what the uniform said. What her 3 jobs said. What the bills piled on her kitchen counter said. But her instincts weren't ordinary. They screamed. She could see the panel from here, through the gap in the curtain. The damaged valve hung at that impossible angle. Metal warped just slightly, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. Hydraulic fluid pooling at the seal, mixing with condensation. At 35,000 feet, cabin pressure was everything. The plane essentially became a sealed tube, hurtling through air too thin to breathe. If that seal failed, if pressure dropped, passengers had seconds before hypoxia turned their brains to static. Shanice had seen it during training. Watched volunteers in pressure chambers go from confident to confused to unconscious in 90 seconds. Seen the way oxygen deprivation turned intelligent people into stumbling children who couldn't remember their own names. She'd been in that chamber herself, felt her thoughts dissolve into soup. The creeping euphoria that made you think everything was fine even as you died. The memory tasted like metal. Baby girl, you got your daddy's heart. Lorraine's voice cut through the spiral. Shanice closed her eyes, seeing her grandmother in that hospital bed last month, frail, tired, but still sharp-eyed. You feeling lost? Lorraine had asked. No, ma'am. Don't lie to me, child. I changed your diapers. Shanice had smiled despite herself. Just... Different than I thought it'd be. Life usually is. Lorraine squeezed her hand with surprising strength. But you know what don't change? Who you are. That uniform you wore, it wasn't what made you brave. Your heart made you brave. Clothes just showed other people what was already there. What if people don't see it anymore? Then you see it. That's enough. Shanice opened her eyes. The panel still hung wrong. The danger still existed. Marcus still thought she was dramatic, unqualified, invisible. But she saw the truth. And maybe this time that had to be enough. She pulled out her trauma kit, a small black pouch she'd carried on every flight since leaving service. Inside, military-grade first aid supplies, a manual resuscitator, a small oxygen cylinder rated for emergency situations. She checked the seals, tested the pressure gauge. Old habits. Beth emerged from the main cabin, shaking her head. Girl, why you gotta make things hard? I'm not making anything hard. I'm identifying a problem, and he's identified that you're expendable. Beth's voice wasn't cruel, just resigned. Rich men don't like being embarrassed, especially not by, she trailed off, by women who look like me, Beth sighed. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The plane climbed higher. 30,000 feet, 32, 35. Shanice felt each 1,000 feet like pressure against her chest. She thought of Row 12, the family with 2 children, a boy maybe 8 reading a graphic novel, a girl 5 or 6, coloring with crayons that scattered when Trevor stumbled. The mother had smiled at Shanice during boarding, one of those rare moments of connection. Thank you. Just for helping with their bags. That family trusted the plane, trusted the crew, trusted that someone would keep them safe. Shanice gripped the trauma kit. She didn't need Marcus to believe her. She just needed to be ready when belief became irrelevant. The memory hit her like turbulence, 5 years earlier. Hindu Kush Mountains, Afghanistan. Shanice rappelled from the helicopter into air so thin it burned her lungs. Below, a medevac bird had crashed, pilot incapacitated. 3 wounded soldiers trapped in the wreckage. The enemy pressed from 2 directions. Her team had maybe 8 minutes. Williams checked the cabin pressure systems. Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled through her helmet. She'd reached the downed bird, crawled inside. The pressure seal had ruptured, combination of crash damage and bullet holes. The wounded men were already showing hypoxia signs. Sluggish movements, confused expressions. One tried to light a cigarette with his finger. Seals compromised. She'd shouted, "They've got 3 minutes, maybe less." Rodriguez hadn't questioned her assessment, hadn't checked her credentials, or reminded her she was the youngest on the team. He'd just acted. Get them on portable oxygen. Move. She'd saved all 3, rigged a temporary seal using emergency supplies and military ingenuity. Kept them conscious until the extraction bird arrived. The citation in her file called it exceptional performance under extreme conditions. Rodriguez just called it Tuesday. That was the job. You identified problems. People listened. Levs continued. Then came the accident that ended everything. A training exercise gone wrong. Mechanical failure during a night jump. Her main chute hadn't deployed properly. She'd survived barely, shattered her left femur, spent 9 months in recovery. The doctors cleared her physically, but the psych eval didn't go as well. You're experiencing hypervigilance, the psychiatrist had explained. You're identifying threats that aren't there. Seeing danger in routine situations. Or I'm seeing danger others miss, she'd countered. That's what concerns us. They'd offered her a medical discharge. Honorable, they called it, though it felt like anything but. She could have fought it. Appealed, probably won. But then Lorraine got sick. Kidney failure. Sudden. Severe. The kind that required immediate intervention and continuous care. The kind that ate through savings like fire through paper. Shanice took the discharge, came home, started applying for civilian jobs with her military certifications. Turns out, pararescue specialist didn't translate well to resume speak. Employers saw a black woman, who'd been medically discharged and assumed damage, unreliability. They smiled politely and said they'd call. They never called, so she'd taken the flight attendant job. The catering gigs, the warehouse shifts, anything that kept Lorraine in a facility with actual nurses instead of the nightmare places that smelled like neglect. Baby girl. You don't have to do this, Lorraine had said when Shanice first visited in her new uniform. I want to. You were saving lives. Now you're serving coffee. I'm saving your life, Shanice had whispered. That's enough. But it hadn't felt like enough. Some days it felt like drowning. Marcus's story was different but equally shaped by desperation. His parents, Lynn and David Chen, had arrived in America with 2 suitcases and a dream that barely survived first contact with reality. His father worked factory floors. His mother cleaned office buildings at night. They spoke limited English and had no connections. Marcus grew up translating bills they couldn't pay, watching his mother fall asleep, standing on the bus ride home, seeing his father's hands crack and bleed from chemicals. You will do better, his mother said every night. Not a wish, a command. So he did. Scholarships to Berkeley, coding 18 hours a day, building apps in his dorm while others partied. He learned early that rules were gatekeepers, designed by people with resources to keep out people without them, so he ignored the gatekeepers. Built products that violated regulations, moved fast, apologized never. China Tech Solutions exploded. 20 employees became 2,000. One office became 50. His parents retired at 60, a miracle they'd never imagined. But success taught him a dangerous lesson. His instincts were superior. His judgment was better. Rules that stopped other people simply didn't apply to him. After all, if he'd followed the rules, he'd still be watching his mother clean toilets. He'd built an empire by trusting himself above all others. Why stop now? At 35,000 feet, these 2 stories collided. Shanice, trained to trust systems and protocols, forced by circumstance into invisibility. Marcus, trained to destroy systems and protocols, rewarded by circumstance with invincibility, both believing they were right. Both shaped by survival, both about to discover that truth didn't care about perspective. The plane climbed, the damaged panel leaked, the clock ticked, and in the galley Shanice made a decision. She couldn't force Marcus to listen, but she could prepare for what happened when he finally had to. She checked her supplies again, reviewed emergency protocols in her mind, calculated oxygen distribution if the system failed. Her military training had one unshakable rule: hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Trust that your preparation will matter when hope runs out. She trusted it. Now, even if Marcus never would, the smell hit her. First, Shanice was restocking beverage supplies when the acrid scent of burning insulation cut through. The cabin's recycled air, faint, most people wouldn't notice it under the coffee and cologne and recycled oxygen, but she'd been trained to. Notice she froze, nostrils flaring. Her pulse kicked up immediately. That old combat response, body recognizing danger before brain could articulate it. Beth was halfway through a drink service. Passengers dozed or tapped on laptops. Marcus had his earbuds in, eyes closed, probably listening to a podcast about disrupting some other industry. Everything looked normal. Shanice moved toward the emergency panel. Each step deliberate, casual. Just the flight attendant doing her job. She knelt beside the damaged section, pretending to check the storage compartment below. From this angle, she could see what the curtain had hidden before. The hydraulic fluid leak had spread, not dramatically, just a slow seep, maybe an ounce collected in the seal. But it had reached the electrical connection that controlled the backup oxygen deployment. Her stomach clenched. She pulled out her phone, angled it for a photo. The flash illuminated something worse: corrosion on the valve assembly. Not from Trevor's impact, this was older, deeper. A maintenance issue that should have been caught weeks ago. The valve that controlled emergency oxygen flow to the entire main cabin showed stress fractures. The kind that happened when metal fatigue met sudden impact, met inadequate inspection protocols. In other words, a disaster waiting for a trigger. How did this pass inspection? She knew how. Corners cut, checklists skipped, someone signing off without looking, because billionaires paid for fast turnarounds, not thorough ones. The same arrogance that put Marcus in this seat had probably rushed mechanics through their work. Shanice's training played out the scenario in her head like a simulation. If cabin pressure dropped now, the automatic system would try to deploy oxygen masks, but with the backup valve compromised and the primary system carrying extra load, the electrical surge could overload the corroded connection. The surge would trip the circuit breaker. Masks would deploy in first class, maybe, but the main cabin would lose emergency oxygen entirely. 200 passengers. Most would have 90 seconds of consciousness. Children less. Even if she manually triggered backup systems, the damaged valve wouldn't hold pressure. Masks would drop but deliver nothing. She thought of row 12. The little girl with her crayons. The boy with his graphic novel, 90 seconds. Her hands shook. She forced them still. Everything okay there? She looked up. Trevor stood in the aisle, laptop clutched to his chest like a shield. His earlier confidence had evaporated into nervous energy. "Fine," Shanice said automatically. "Just checking inventory. About before, I really am sorry. I didn't mean to... It's not your fault." And it wasn't. Trevor was just another variable in an equation that started long before this flight. "But I need you to do something for me." He blinked. "Okay. Tell Mr. Chen I need to speak with the pilot, directly, about a potential safety issue." Trevor's face drained. "He's already mad at you." "If I interrupt him again, then tell him it's about the valve assembly that keeps this plane pressurized. Tell him I found evidence of pre-existing corrosion that wasn't on the maintenance logs. Tell him if we lose cabin pressure with this system in this state, emergency oxygen won't deploy to the main cabin." Trevor stared at her. "You're serious?" "Completely. He's going to fire you." "Probably." Shanice stood, met his eyes. "But if I'm right and we do nothing, he'll have 200 deaths to explain. You'll have to explain why you knew and stayed quiet." That landed. Trevor's throat bobbed. I'll tell him." He hurried toward first class, laptop tucked awkwardly under one arm. Shanice watched him go, knowing how this would play out. Marcus would dismiss it again. Maybe more cruelly this time. Maybe loud enough that other passengers would hear and judge, but she had to try. She returned to the panel, pulled out her phone, and did what she should have done 10 minutes ago. She opened the aviation safety reporting app, required on all commercial crew devices, and filed an official report. Location: China Tech charter flight. Tail number N47CX issue. Compromised emergency oxygen system. Corroded valve assembly. Inadequate primary and backup deployment capability. Risk assessment. Critical immediate action. Recommended: return to departure airport. She hit submit. The report would route to the FAA, the airline, and the pilots simultaneously. Official, documented, impossible to ignore. Her phone buzzed immediately. The pilot's response came through the crew messaging system. Report received. "Can you send photos of the corrosion?" She attached the 3 images she'd taken. Hit send 30 seconds later. Christ, when did you notice this? Trevor's impact revealed initial damage. Further inspection showed pre-existing corrosion. Stand by. Discussing with Captain. Shanice exhaled slowly. Finally, someone listening. She looked toward first class. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see Trevor hovering near Marcus, speaking urgently. Marcus's expression shifted from annoyed to angry to, for just a second, uncertain. He pulled out his phone. Checked something. His jaw tightened. He stood. Walked toward the galley. His face was stone. "You filed an FAA report, not a question." "Yes, sir." Protocol requires protocol. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. You just cost me this entire trip. Do you understand that? The pilots are initiating emergency descent. We're turning back. I have 200 people on this plane who are about to be inconvenienced because you couldn't handle being corrected. Sir, the corrosion is real. The valve assembly is probably fine, but now I can't prove that without landing, without inspections, without delays. He leaned closer. I'm going to make sure you never work in aviation again. You understand me? The intercom crackled. The captain's voice filled the cabin. Calm, professional, terrifying. Ladies and gentlemen, we're initiating an emergency descent due to a potential equipment malfunction. Please return to your seats immediately and fasten your seatbelts. Flight crew, take your positions. The cabin erupted. Passengers looked around, confused and frightened. Beth rushed past, her face pale. Trevor stumbled back to his seat. Marcus stared at Shanice. This is on you. Then the explosion came, not loud, more like a champagne cork multiplied by 1,000. A sharp pop that made everyone freeze. The plane shuddered. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, some of them. In first class they dangled properly. In the main cabin, half the compartment stayed closed. The other half dropped masks that hung limp and useless. Passengers screamed. Children cried. Someone shouted for help, and Shanice felt the air pressure change, that subtle pop in her ears that meant the seal had failed. Marcus's face transformed. Confusion, understanding, horror. The captain's voice cracked with urgency. Rapid decompression. Emergency descent in progress. Flight crew, initiate oxygen protocols. Immediately. 3 minutes until people started losing consciousness. Shanice was already. Moving chaos swallowed sound. Passengers clawed at empty mask compartments. A woman in row 8 hyperventilated, fingers scraping plastic. The businessman beside her slumped sideways, eyes glazing. In row 12, the mother pulled her children close, her face a mask of terror as she realized their masks hung limp, no oxygen flowing. Marcus stood frozen in the aisle. His mouth moved, but no words came. He watched his assistant Trevor gasp and fumble with a mask that delivered nothing. Watched investors and executives he'd convinced to fly with him turn pale and confused. The plane tilted into emergency descent. Gravity shifted. Loose items tumbled. Someone's laptop crashed into the floor. Beth clutched a seat back, her breathing rapid and shallow. Shanice, what do we... But Shanice wasn't listening to the panic. She was listening to something deeper. The voice from 5 years ago. Rodriguez in her helmet. Pressure's gone. You've got 3 minutes, move. Time slowed. Her vision sharpened. She counted passengers in distress. 18 in immediate danger. The elderly man in row 6. The pregnant woman in row 15. The family in 12. 3 portable oxygen bottles in the emergency cabinet. Not enough. Never enough. But her training had prepared her for impossible math. For choosing who gets saved when you can't save everyone. For turning chaos into sequence, panic into protocol. Baby girl, you got your daddy's heart. Lorraine's voice cut through the screaming. Shanice moved. She grabbed the emergency medical kit and sprinted down the aisle. No hesitation. No asking permission. The military posture returned to her spine. Shoulders back, chin up, movements precise. Beth. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Get every portable oxygen bottle from all 3 galleys, now. Beth stumbled toward the forward cabin, operating on pure obedience to authority she recognized. Shanice reached row 12 first. The mother was crying, pressing her useless mask against the little girl's face. It's not working, please, it's not working. I know. I've got you. Shanice pulled the portable bottle from her kit, fitted the mask to the girl's face. Small hands grabbed at it desperately. Breathe slowly. In through your nose. That's it. The boy beside her was already showing signs, lips tinged blue, movement sluggish. She switched the bottle to him, counting seconds. 30 seconds each. Rotate. Keep them conscious until the pilots descended low enough for breathable air. You're doing great, she told the mother. Hold this mask for her. Count to 30, then switch to your son. I'll be back. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. Row 6. The elderly man had slumped completely unconscious. She checked his pulse, thready but present. Opened his airway, administered oxygen. 15 seconds. His eyelids fluttered. Row 15. The pregnant woman was conscious but gasping. My baby, your baby's fine. You're going to be fine. Shanice fitted another mask. Slow breaths. Match my count. She moved like water through the cabin, prioritizing, calculating, keeping people conscious with brutal efficiency and portable oxygen that wouldn't last. And behind her, Marcus Chen finally understood what he'd done. He stood in the aisle watching this woman, this flight attendant he'd dismissed. Insulted, threatened, saved the lives he'd endangered. Watched her move with precision that made his billions feel like monopoly money. Watched her be what he'd never been. Useful. The shame hit him like decompression. Beth returned with 2 more oxygen bottles, her hands shaking. That's all we have. It's enough. Shanice took them, mind racing through calculations. How long until we reach 10,000 feet? The captain's voice answered through the intercom. 2 minutes to breathable air. Hold on. 2 minutes. 120 seconds. 18 people losing consciousness. 3 bottles plus what remained in her original. Not enough oxygen, but enough time. Beth listened carefully. Shanice grabbed her shoulders. The masks in first class are working. I need you to disconnect 3 of them. Just remove them from the tubing. Bring me the tubing. What? Why, the tubes connect to the main oxygen line. If we can splice them into the manual release valve in the galley, we can create a makeshift distribution system. We won't get everyone, but we'll get enough. Beth stared. How do you know that'll work? Because I've done it before. Afghanistan, downed helicopter. Go. Beth ran toward first class. Shanice turned to the emergency panel she'd warned them about hours ago. The damaged valve assembly mocked her. Corroded metal, leaking seal. But behind it, the manual release valve. A backup system meant for ground maintenance. She pulled the panel fully open. Exposed the valve wheel. It was designed to release oxygen directly into the cabin when turned, bypassing the electrical deployment system entirely. But it required pressure, force, and a connection point that didn't exist in the standard configuration. Trevor appeared at her elbow, his face gray but determined. What can I do? She looked at him. Can you hold pressure on a seal while I splice connections? I don't know. Yes or no? Yes. Then get ready. Beth returned with 3 oxygen tubes torn from first-class masks. Marcus followed her silent, carrying his suitcase. He opened it without speaking. Inside tools. A multi-tool kit he traveled with. Screwdrivers, pliers, electrical tape. He handed them to Shanice. What do you need? She met his eyes. Saw something broken there. Something humbled. Hold this. She gave him a flashlight. Aim here. They worked in concert. Shanice spliced the tubes into a junction she created, using a plastic water bottle cut in half. Crude but functional. Beth held pieces in place. Trevor maintained pressure on the leaking seal with both hands, his face red with effort. Marcus directed light and said nothing. For the first time in years, he followed someone else's lead. Almost, Shanice twisted the final connection. Trevor, when I say go, release pressure and step back fast. Okay, she gripped the manual release valve. Her hands remembered this motion from training. Remembered the resistance, the catch point, the moment when pressure found its path. Go. Trevor jumped back. She turned the valve hard. It resisted, corroded, stubborn, then gave with a grinding shriek. Oxygen hissed into the makeshift distribution system. The pressure pushed through spliced tubes toward the main cabin. Not perfect, not evenly distributed, but enough. In row 12, the mother gasped as the mask in her hand suddenly pushed back with pressure. Oxygen flowing. Her children breathed deep. Around the cabin the sound rippled. Gasps of relief. The elderly man's color returned. The pregnant woman's breathing steadied. Not everyone. Some rows were still unpowered, still dependent on portable bottles. But enough. Shanice rotated through the cabin with her remaining portable supply, filling gaps, keeping the most vulnerable conscious. 90 seconds later, the plane dropped through 10,000 feet. The pressure equalized. Air became breathable. The captain's voice returned, hoarse with relief. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached safe altitude. The immediate danger has passed. Emergency landing in 12 minutes. The cabin erupted in sobs, relief, terror, gratitude. Shanice leaned against the galley wall. Her hands shook now that the adrenaline was fading. Beth hugged her wordlessly. Trevor slumped to the floor, crying quietly. And Marcus Chen stood in the aisle watching the woman he'd tried to destroy, the woman who'd saved them all. He opened his mouth. Closed it? No words existed for this. The emergency landing was textbook. Fire trucks flanked the runway. Paramedics swarmed the moment the wheels stopped. Passengers evacuated down inflatable slides, crying and holding each other. The family from row 12 hugged Shanice so tightly she could barely breathe. The mother whispered "thank you" 50 times, a prayer and a promise. The elderly man from row 6 kissed her hand. The pregnant woman just wept. They were taken to the terminal in groups. Medical personnel checked vitals, administered oxygen, documented symptoms. Media trucks were already gathering outside. News traveled fast when billionaires almost died. Shanice sat in the crew debrief room, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her. Beth beside her. The shock was setting in now. Delayed reaction flooding through her system. "You saved them," Beth whispered. "All of them." "We saved them," Shanice corrected. "No, honey. That was you." The door opened. FAA investigators entered, followed by airline executives, followed by 2 people in military dress uniforms. Shanice recognized the insignia. Air Force high-ranking Colonel Patricia Nkosi stepped forward, her dark face stern. "Senior Airman Williams." Shanice stood automatically. "Old training." "Ma'am?" "At ease." The colonel's expression softened slightly. "You filed the safety report." "Yes, ma'am." "And you identified the corrosion pre-impact?" "Yes, ma'am." Documented with photos time-stamped 17 minutes before decompression. The FAA investigator, a white man with tired eyes, flipped through his tablet. The maintenance logs for this aircraft were falsified. Someone signed off on inspections that never happened. That corrosion was 6 months old. You couldn't have known that. I knew something was wrong. And you reported it through proper channels. Colonel Nkosi stepped closer. Then, when those channels failed, you improvised a pressure distribution system using makeshift components. Where did you learn that? Afghanistan, ma'am. Downed medevac bird. Similar compromise. I remember that incident. That was you? Yes, ma'am. The colonel exchanged glances with the other officer. Something passed between them Shanice couldn't read. The door opened again. Marcus entered, flanked by lawyers and executives. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. His $1,000 shirt was wrinkled, stained with hydraulic fluid and coffee. He saw Shanice and stopped. The room went silent. "Mr. Chen," the FAA investigator said carefully, "we need your statement." Marcus didn't look away from Shanice. "She told me. Before we took off, she identified the problem and I dismissed her." His lawyers tensed. One leaned in to whisper urgently. Marcus waved him off. "She told me about the panel, about the danger. She told me she had experience with emergency systems and I—" He swallowed. "I mocked her publicly. I told her she was being dramatic. I threatened her job. Mr. Chen, I really must advise—" His lawyer tried again. "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "Everyone here needs to know." She tried to stop this. I wouldn't listen. Then when it happened, she saved every single person on that plane, including me. Especially me. He turned to the investigators. "Whatever liability exists, it's mine. She did everything right. So I did everything wrong. His chief counsel looked like he might faint. The FAA investigator made notes. We'll need full statements from both of you. The maintenance records investigation will take months. But preliminarily, Ms. Williams, your actions prevented fatalities. Possibly 200 of them. Shanice felt the room tilt slightly. 200. Colonel Nkosi cleared her throat. Williams, I need to speak with you privately. About reinstatement. Shanice's head snapped up. Ma'am? Your medical discharge was based on a psych evaluation that flagged hypervigilance and threat identification in non-emergency contexts. The colonel's eyes were sharp. Today you correctly identified a critical threat that everyone else missed. That's not hypervigilance. That's expertise. The other officer stepped forward. We'd like you to reconsider your discharge. The Air Force made a mistake. We'd like to correct it. The words didn't land immediately. Shanice heard them, but they felt like someone else's story, reinstatement. Back to the work she loved. Back to purpose beyond surviving. Her voice cracked. My grandmother needs me. We understand. We can discuss assignment options near quality care facilities. But Williams, the colonel's voice gentled. The Air Force needs people who see what others miss, who act when others freeze. That's you. That's always been you. Shanice looked at Beth, who was crying openly now, looked at the investigators, who watched with respect in their eyes, looked at Marcus, who stood there holding the weight of his arrogance like stones. Then she thought of Lorraine, of her father's flag in its shadow box, of the voice that had carried her through today. You got your daddy's heart. I need to think about it, she whispered. Take your time, Colonel Nkosi said. We'll be here. Marcus approached slowly, his lawyers trailing helplessly. He stopped 3 feet away, maintaining respectful distance. I'm sorry. 2 words, inadequate. I'm sorry for dismissing you, for mocking you, for threatening you. For being so arrogant, I almost killed everyone on that plane. He paused. You tried to save us before disaster struck. I made disaster inevitable. That's on me. Shanice studied him, saw genuine remorse in his eyes, but also saw the structure that created him. Systems that taught men like him to trust only themselves, to see service workers as scenery, to mistake wealth for wisdom. Do you know why I stayed calm? She asked quietly. He shook his head. Because I've done this before. Because I trained for years to handle exactly this scenario. Because expertise isn't about where you currently work. It's about what you know. She held his gaze. You assumed I knew nothing because I served you coffee. That almost killed you. The words landed like punches. I know, he whispered. Do better. She stood. Use your billions to make systems that listen to people like me. Change maintenance protocols. Fund safety oversight. Hire people who've actually done the work instead of just theorized about it. She paused. That's how you apologize. Not with words. With action. Marcus nodded slowly. I will, I promise. She believed him. Maybe not completely, but enough. The investigators dismissed her for now. More statements would come later. Beth walked her to the terminal exit. Outside, sunset painted the sky in shades of burnt orange and gold. Shanice pulled out her phone. Dialed Lorraine's facility. Grandma, it's me. I need to tell you about my day. 3 months later. The investigation concluded what Shanice had known immediately. Systemic maintenance failures. Falsified inspection records. Corporate pressure on mechanics to prioritize speed over safety. The charter company lost its license. 6 executives faced criminal charges. Marcus Chen became an unlikely advocate for aviation safety reform. He liquidated a portion of his holdings to establish the Williams Foundation for First Responder Training. Fully funded scholarships for pararescue specialists, emergency medical technicians, firefighters. He testified before Congress about the dangers of corporate arrogance and regulatory capture. The media loved his redemption arc. Shanice found it performative but sincere enough. He was trying. That counted for something. She'd declined the Air Force reinstatement. Not because she didn't want it. God, she wanted it. But because Lorraine's health had declined again. The choice between duty and love was no choice at all. Instead, she took a different offer. The FAA hired her as a safety consultant. They wanted her expertise identifying threats others missed, her ability to translate military precision to civilian contexts. The pay was better than 3 jobs combined. The work was meaningful. She could stay near Lorraine. She stood in Lorraine's room now, afternoon light streaming through windows that overlooked a small garden. Her grandmother sat in her chair, wrapped in a lavender blanket, looking frail but sharp-eyed as ever. "Read it to me again," Lorraine said. Shanice unfolded the letter for the 3rd time. Official FAA letterhead. Letters of commendation, the civilian equivalent of medals she'd earned in uniform. For exceptional performance in identifying and responding to critical safety hazards, resulting in the preservation of 200 lives. 200, Lorraine breathed. "Baby girl, it wasn't just me, Grandma. Hush, let an old woman be proud." Lorraine reached for her hand. "Your daddy would have burst with pride." "You know that?" Shanice's throat tightened. She squeezed back. "I still see him sometimes," Lorraine continued. "In you. The way you stand when you're scared but doing it anyway. The way you see people, really see them, not just look." She paused. "He'd say you have his heart. If I say you've got your own. And it's mighty." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, evening birds sang their territories. Nurses moved quietly through hallways. The monitors beeped their steady rhythms. "The Air Force called again," Shanice said quietly. "They're persistent. They should be. You're exceptional. I can't leave you. Child, I'm 78 years old with kidney failure. You think I'm going anywhere exciting?" Lorraine's eyes twinkled. "I'm here whether you're serving coffee or saving the world. The only question is which one feeds your soul." Shanice didn't answer. Couldn't yet. Her phone buzzed. A text from Beth. "Miss you already. New girl can't make coffee for shit." Another text from Trevor. "Started volunteering at aviation safety non-profit. Thought you'd want to know. Thank you for everything." Another from the family in row 12. "Emma drew you a picture. Can we visit?" She smiled. Saved their lives, earned their gratitude, became part of their stories. But Lorraine was right. The question wasn't about impact. She could make impact anywhere. The question was about alignment, about whether her work matched her heart. She thought of Marcus, using his billions to change systems. Thought of the Colonel's words. The Air Force needs people who see what others miss. Thought of her father's flag, carefully folded, waiting. "I don't have to decide today," she said finally. "No," Lorraine agreed. "But someday soon you will." "And baby girl?" "Whatever you choose, choose brave." Shanice kissed her grandmother's forehead. "I will." She left the facility as sunset painted the sky in shades of ruby red and gold, the same colors that had marked the day everything changed. The day she'd been invisible and essential, dismissed and indispensable, silent and heard. Her phone rang. "Unknown number," she answered. "Ms. Williams, this is Captain Rodriguez." "I don't know if you remember me." She stopped walking. "Sergeant Rodriguez, Afghanistan, Hindu Kush. Colonel Rodriguez now." His voice carried warmth. "I heard about your flight. Saw the FAA report. Recognized the name." He paused. "I'm consulting for a new agency. Civilian search and rescue coordination with military support. We need a deputy director. Someone who understands both worlds. I thought of you. Another door opening. Another path. Can I think about it?" She asked. "Take your time. But Williams, you were the best operator I ever trained. Whatever you choose, choose yourself. You've earned that." The call ended. Janice stood in the parking lot, holding 3 possibilities in her hands like fragile birds. Air Force reinstatement, FAA consultation, civilian rescue coordination, or maybe something else entirely. Maybe the lesson wasn't about which door to walk through, but about knowing she could open any of them. She thought of that moment in the galley, hands trembling, Marcus's dismissal echoing. The certainty that she was right even when no one believed her. That certainty lived in her bones now, permanent, unshakable. She'd been invisible. She'd been ignored. She'd been threatened, and she'd saved them anyway. That was power. Not the kind Marcus wielded with his billions, but the kind Lorraine carried in her quiet faith, the kind her father had shown in his service, the power of knowing who you are when the world tells you you're nothing. Shanice walked to her car. Tomorrow she'd visit Row 12 family. Next week she'd meet with Colonel Rodriguez. Someday she'd decide about the Air Force. But tonight she'd sit with Lorraine and be enough because she was enough. She'd always been enough. The world was just finally catching up. 6 months after the flight, Shanice stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. The Aviation Safety Conference had drawn hundreds. Pilots, engineers, regulators, survivors. She'd been invited to speak about threat identification and emergency response, about seeing what others missed. She'd almost declined. Public speaking wasn't her strength. But Lorraine had insisted, "Baby girl, your voice saved lives. Let it teach lives too." So here she was, looking out at faces that looked back with respect. She told them about the corroded valve, about filing the report no one wanted to hear, about Marcus's dismissal and the explosion that proved her right, about the makeshift oxygen system spliced from water bottles and first-class tubing. She told them about the choice every professional faces, silence or truth, safety or convenience, being liked or being right. "I wasn't trying to be difficult," she said, her voice steady. "I was trying to keep people alive. That's the job. That's always the job." She paused, looking at the faces. "The people who see danger aren't pessimists. They're practitioners. We've lived through the disasters you're trying to prevent. We know what the wreckage looks like, and when we speak, it's not from fear, it's from experience." In the third row, Marcus sat with his executive team. He'd come unannounced. When their eyes met, he nodded once. "Acknowledgement, respect," Shanice continued. "Systems fail when we trust authority over expertise, when we value confidence over competence, when we dismiss warnings from people we've decided don't matter." Her voice strengthened. "I was invisible to that cabin until I became essential, but I was essential the entire time. My expertise didn't change. Only their perception did." She thought of Lorraine in the audience, watching with fierce pride, thought of her father's flag, now hanging in her new office at the Civilian Rescue Coordination Agency, thought of the 200 lives that continued, because one woman refused to be silenced. "The lesson isn't about me," she said. "It's about us, about building systems that listen before disaster strikes, about valuing every voice that speaks truth, regardless of who's speaking, about understanding that the person serving your coffee might be the person who saves your life." She closed with her grandmother's words, the ones that had carried her through. True power isn't being heard. It's speaking truth even when they refuse to listen. It's knowing your worth even when they deny it. It's saving people who never saw you coming. The applause started slow, then built. Standing ovation. Marcus stood first, his face wet with tears. Shanice stepped away from the podium. Beth waited in the wings with a hug. Colonel Nkosi offered a firm handshake and a knowing smile. The family from Row 12, Emma and her brother and their parents, rushed forward with more drawings, more gratitude, more love. That evening, Shanice sat with Lorraine in the garden. The sky turned from burnt orange to deep burgundy to black velvet studded with stars. "You did good, baby girl," Lorraine whispered. "Are your daddy's watching, smiling?" "I hope so, I know so." Lorraine squeezed her hand. "You got his heart, but you got your own voice. That combination? That's unstoppable." They sat in silence, watching stars wheel overhead. The same stars her father had seen in Afghanistan. The same stars that had witnessed her saving 200 strangers. The same stars that would watch whatever came next. Shanice thought about the future, about the agency she'd helped build, about the search and rescue teams she'd coordinate, about the lives she'd touch in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But mostly she thought about that moment on the plane, the moment between disaster and salvation, the moment her voice finally mattered because lives depended on it. She'd been preparing for that moment her entire life, and now she knew. Every moment since had been preparing her for the next one. Somewhere a plane took off. Somewhere someone noticed something wrong. Somewhere a voice spoke truth into silence. And the world kept spinning, kept flying, kept trusting that when danger came, someone would be ready. Someone would see, someone would act. Someone like Shanice Williams, who learned that being invisible didn't mean being powerless. It meant being underestimated. And underestimated people change the world.